The frontier of the telephone.
Communication. It's something so simple to understand, yet something so unbelievably important for humanity. Nowadays, not even thousands of miles, the most treacherous obstacles can prevent two people from contacting each other. Food, water, safety, and shelter are all just one press of a button away. The invention of the telephone has stimulated the economy and revolutionized societal and international communication.
Telephone's effect on technology. By looking at pre-existing technologies, we can determine how and why the telephone was invented. The Leyden jar facilitated the idea of releasing bursts of electricity for communication. The Volta battery created a way to store that electricity, and the invention of the electromagnet led to the creation of the electromagnetic field, which would be used to broadcast sound through antennas. The telegraph built off of all these innovations and led inventors experimenting with the transmission of human voices through sound waves. The radio and the telephone were two prominent methods of long-distance communication at the time. Telegraphs were a complex process. A person had to translate messages into Morse code, send it, have someone receive it, and then decode it. Radios were invented after the telephone in 1895 and draw on the ability of the telephone to transmit voices over long distances. While the telephone influenced much of the technology around radios, radio signals were mainly broadcasted to the public and not to individuals. The evolution of the telephone technology shows it constantly changing and developing over time. For example, in the 1920s, telephone operators were no longer in use. In the 1930s, rotary phones allowed people to speak and listen through the same device. In the 1950s, phones without cords became popular, and in the 1990s, it starts the use of the cell phone, which develops into what we now know as the modern smartphone. Another form of long-distance communication is the postal system that has been around long before the telephone and is still in use today as an effective form of communication. However, the postal system is slow and the price of shipping is constantly increasing. Carl Madison offers his perspective on postal communication while he resided in Russia during the late 1900s.
But they didn't know how to get me when I was in the villages.
Oh.
I mean, it was very unlikely that letters would get there. So I probably got a few letters, received them. But a lot of it doesn't arrive. And the further away you are from Moscow or St. Petersburg, the less likely it is to get there.
The Reconstruction era also led to encouraged migration with carpetbaggers who moved south intending to increase Southern integration and diversification of production. The Freedmen's Bureau also helped integrate and educate former enslaved people into Northern societies. This is where the telephone comes in to revolutionize rapid communication between families and businesses experiencing change through this time period.
Mrs. Anne Rooney Burt was born in 1942 and remembers sitting on her grandmother's lap while she worked as a telegraph operator in the early 1900s. The process was expensive and long-winded. It is no surprise that women in the late 19th and early 20th century had limited liberties and almost no career opportunities other than being secretaries.
1910 and the Second World War, those were jobs that women could do, working for the phone company.
Initially, young men were deemed too crude and irresponsible for the job, whether they'd cuss out callers or roughhouse while they were supposed to be connecting lines. Especially during World War I and World War II, women were called to maintain connections between people and countries in the Signal Corps Female Telephone Operators Unit. Many women, like Julia O'Connor, born 1890, found their voice outside of the household through opportunities that telephone operating had given them. O'Connor unionized the women in the telecommunications business and helped in suffrage to ensure that women were properly compensated for their abilities.
Yes, women workers do present problems, Joe. It's tough, I know.
The new opportunities gave women a voice and exposed them to working conditions they saw as unjust, especially as they possessed more power during worker shortages in World War I.
From mobile banking to staying updated on global prices, the invention of the telephone has been a pivotal point in international economic development, not only due to its creation of millions of well-paying jobs, but also due to increase productivity and customer satisfaction and providing accessible information for businesses. By 1967, the salaries of people in the telephone industry increased as a result of a surge in demand for telephone services. This stimulated the economy through $22.5 million in Virginia and DC alone. This was not limited to the telephone industry. For every $1 million increment of increased demand, the contributing industries such as providers of raw materials, construction of infrastructure, and transportation of materials grew as well. In this interview with Rooney Burt, a receptionist for an orthopedic surgeon in Beverly Hills, she explains how her job was made more efficient by the telephone.
And I can't imagine what the job was like without a phone. And I didn't have a switchboard or anything. I just had a phone with a lot of lines on it. Enormous. But I had all the patients' records behind me, and lots of filing cabinets.
And now everything can be sorted in a Google Doc. Ain't that crazy?
Right. I'm sure there's a much better system now.
Take, for example, the fishing industry in Kerala, India, which between 1997 and 2001 saw a substantial increase in access to mobile telephones among the markets. As a result, their prices remained steady, which increased the welfare of both consumers and producers. Advertising in phone books and the ability to call customers in different area codes allowed for companies to reach wider audiences for their services and products. In a 2020 experiment in central Tanzania, enterprises randomly selected to be placed on the yellow pages found themselves with more calls than ever and were 20% more likely to hire more workers. Overall, the phone book has aided in stimulating the economy by $1.3 trillion in U.S. commerce.
Nowadays, instead of making a call once a month or sharing a phone with numerous other people, individuals can make phone calls wherever and whenever they want. This has allowed societies to be more flexible. During the 2020 epidemic, people reported that hearing familiar voices helped them get through the trying times. Phones also help people do other important things, such as make appointments or contact the authorities. Prior to the 1960s, it was difficult to easily contact authorities quickly. This led to the murder of Kitty Genovese, as witnesses weren't able to call for help. 3 years later, then-President Lyndon B. Johnson signed a bill making 911 the central line to call in case of emergencies. Nowadays, people can be sure that help will arrive quickly when they call. So despite receiving some communication competition in the form of the internet, the phone's communicative properties have allowed it to remain relevant in the modern era. Phones truly have been important since their inception. All throughout their lives, they aided with numerous political, cultural, economic, and societal developments. So, if you are somehow under the impression that phones weren't important at all, then this is your much-needed wake-up call.